Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Barbells and BJJ podcast, yet again with your host, Mr. George Cresswell, and it is good morning because it is 00:42 at time of recording. Anyway, I just wanted to step on you a bit quick because I wanted to bring to the table what I thought was a really, really important episode with regards to a very, very popular, what I'm going to be referring to as ergogenic aid, but it'll also be known as supplement. It'll go by the common phrase being supplement to describe it, and that is creatine. We're going to go through a little bit about what it is, a little bit about how it works, why it's useful, some common misconceptions to do with creatine and stuff like that. So yeah, it's probably going to be quite a long episode, quite a science-heavy episode, but I do hope you enjoy it. I do hope you find it useful. Hope you take something away from it, a little bit more understanding of what creatine is, why it works and how it's useful, what it is and what it isn't. So when we're talking creatine, creatine is basically just what's known as an organic compound found primarily in skeletal muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle is any muscle you think of that provides locomotion as a function. So your biceps, your quadriceps, your pectorals, your back, etc. Any muscle that is connected to the skeleton is a skeletal muscle. However, there are also trace amounts of creatine in the brain, in the heart, in the liver, and in the testes as well. In terms of source and where we get creatine from, mainly comes from red meat, poultry, and seafood that we eat in terms of dietary intake, and it can also be supplemented with in various forms. You've probably seen them in the marketing campaigns. You've got bog standard creatine monohydrate, you'll have creatine ethyl ester, you'll have many different forms of creatine that basically all do the same thing, but we'll be getting onto that a little bit later. It is the most researched backed performance aid that we have to date. Obviously legal performance aid, obviously there's illegal performance aids as well, and has been used to enhance sporting performance and work capacity throughout the years, ever since it was found, throughout the decades, over the course of time that it has been researched. It has been extensively researched, and many proposed benefits include benefits to muscular strength and endurance, as well as to body composition in terms of increasing lean body mass and fat-free mass, which typically what we look at as skeletal muscle mass and body water, stuff like that. Fat-free mass and lean body mass is basically anything that isn't fat mass. And it also seems to work in combination with other supplements as well. Also seems to work well in combination with other supplements as well. So it's a very, very good work capacity enhancer. You heard me use the term at the start of this episode, which was ergogenic aid, and that's no, just nebulous term. Ergo means work, and then aid means, or ergo means work, and genic means to create work, and then aid to enhance that work. Think about it. You might come across in your gym various types of ergometer, meaning work tracker, basically. Treadmill is a running ergometer. A bike in the gym is a cycle ergometer, and ski erg, it's just abbreviated to make it easier and more attractive to say, but ski ergometer. So that's all that term means. Creatine is also what is known as an osmolyte, which is meaning it is a substrate or a substance that pulls water into the cells where it is located. Or also, it will pull water more specifically from the extracellular fluid, which is the fluid outside of cells, into the intracellular space. That is where creatine's water retention and hydration considerations come into play, or effects come into play, rather. So this means that it will predominantly pull water into skeletal muscle. However, as it's being absorbed, it might pull a little bit of water into the GI tract as well. And that's why some people, when they're doing a loading phase, can have a little bit of GI discomfort when taking creatine in a loading phase at high doses. So, it can cause a little bit of GI upset, but it's not something that is going to cause across the board. There's no evidence to support that. So in terms of how we get creatine, and I'm going off a little bit of an article which I've written here and I wrote a little while ago. So creatine is metabolized or created via a series of reactions that are to do with the urea cycle predominantly. So there are quite a few different amino acids that are used, different enzymes that are used to create creatine within the liver. A couple of the key players involved in the cycle are arginine and glycine that help to form another amino acid known as L-ornithine. And this is a substrate, L-ornithine and guadinoacetic acid. Sorry, I missed that one out. And this is through a reaction catalyzed. And this is where you get into very long names of enzymes. Let me just tell you, if the name of a substrate has multiple dashes and a colon and an A's on the end, it's probably going to be very hard to pronounce, but it's probably an enzyme, a very, very important enzyme that's involved in these reactions. But anyway, this one is known as L-arginine glycine amidinotransferase. And that's quite low ball compared to some of the ones we're going to be reading in a minute. But this acid then, this guadinoacetic acid, is subsequently via a process called methylation by the aminidino group, and this is another enzyme which is even longer, the S-adenosyl L-methionine N-guadinoacetate methyltransferase enzyme. I did that in one go. I'm proud of myself for that. Anyway, all this is fancy speak for basically that as a result of the urea cycle, creatine is created, right? It's a natural substrate that's involved in the urea cycle. It comes from the urea cycle through these amino acid reactions and these enzymatic reactions, and it has uses within the body with regards to ATP production. ATP is a substrate by the name of adenosine triphosphate, and it is the energy currency of the body, basically. So when we're looking at any form of mammal, really, the one thing we have in common is that we generate energy on a cellular level by this ATP molecule. And the way it works, it is broken down by an enzyme called ATPase into adenosine diphosphate. So basically, before I go into that, think of this ATP as an adenosine molecule. So think of it as like a pentagon, or maybe even a 50p shape, right? Because if you're British and you work in pounds and pences, you'll understand where this analogy is going for in a minute. If you imagine this adenosine as a 50 pence piece, and then you have 3 10 pence pieces chemically bonded to it, that's ATP. ATP. It's ATP. 50, 10, 10, 10, ATP. Well, ATP is not similar in terms of its currency value, but it's similar in terms of it's 1 adenosine and 3 phosphates, hence adenosine triphosphate. Okay? When energy is needed by the body, it could be for anything. It could be for doing what I'm doing now with all this. It could just be to breathe. It could be to keep the heart pumping. It could be a nerve impulse, whatever. It doesn't really matter. ATP is required because we get energy from the breakdown of ATP into a substrate known as ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and an inorganic phosphate. So basically imagine one of those phosphates, the bond is poof, it's cleaved, the bond is broken, and energy is released from that chemical reaction. That's where we get energy for cellular processes from. We have many different ways of creating ATP to then subsequently break it down, and over time it is resynthesized and it's broken down again. It's a constant cycle. It's a constant cycle, the ATP ADP cycle. Okay? And that's what creatine is used for. Creatine takes part from one of these energy systems, particularly the most high intensity, high demand, very short lasting energy system known as the ATP phosphocreatine system. So creatine in the body stored in different forms. You have mainly phosphocreatine, or PCR, which is a creatine molecule bound to a high energy phosphate. And you just have creatine. You have the different form of creatine called creatinine. You have an enzyme which catalyzes creatine called creatine kinase. Anyway, you have all these different types and forms. They're mainly all found in skeletal muscle, with fast twitch skeletal muscle providing the predominant and largest phosphocreatine store. Okay? So the way it works is that when you're being put under conditions of needing a lot of energy very, very quickly, think of it like you're doing a sprint, you're doing your 3 rep max deadlift or 1 rep max deadlift, you're doing the most powerful ballistic movement that you can, whether it be a ballistic push-up or a counter movement jump or whatever, you need a lot of energy very, very quickly. Or it might be a short series of events. It might be a short series of repeated sprints, staccato fashion, or whatever it is. If you need a lot of energy very, very quickly, or you need a high force production or high velocity, it'll be the ATP phosphocreatine system that does it. You may already have a baseline knowledge of how energy is created within the body, and you may know that we have energy systems within the body, one of which uses oxygen and two of which don't. Okay, you have three different energy systems. You have, as I said, the ATP PCR system, you have glycolysis, and you also have oxidative phosphorylation. Basically, another term for glycolysis is the lactic acid system. Okay, but basically the way this works, or the way ATP generation works, the constant turnover of ATP is predominantly done if we just sat here talking and on just a general daily basis. The predominant way which we get ATP is going to be from the oxidative phosphorylation, the last one, or the aerobic metabolism, okay? Using oxygen and going through the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain to create ATP subsequently. And it creates a lot of it for every single reaction of this that is done. It creates a lot more ATP than a singular reaction with phosphocreatine, for example, as we get onto in a minute. But the thing is with that is it cannot sustain, or it cannot provide energy in time for these high intensity, immediate need of energy. As a result, we need an energy substrate that can be used very, very quickly and provide a lot of bang for the buck, so to speak. But the downside of that is it exhausts very quickly. That's where phosphocreatine comes in. When you accost a saber-toothed tiger and this going back to our evolutionary roots as hunter-gatherers, right? When you accost a saber-toothed tiger in the forest and you start sprinting away, it's going to, and if you manage to make it away within the first couple of seconds, it's going to be phosphocreatine you have to thank for that, okay? So what phosphocreatine does is, under these conditions, it donates the phosphate that it is bound to ADP, which has just been broken down from ATP, creating energy. As a result, this allows ATP to be resynthesized much quicker, and you can sustain this high energy output for that little bit longer, and you can sustain a higher energy output for this time, so you get much more energy for this short burst of activity, but it exhausts very, very quickly. This is exhausted roughly in about 8 seconds, okay? But for a sprint, which may only last about 8 to 10 seconds, you know, it's all pretty much, not 100%, but it's pretty much all phosphocreatine that does that. Same thing when you're lifting your 1 rep max, or you're weightlifting, you know, trying to clean and jerk 230 whatever kilos above your head, you know. There's many energy systems, as I said, I play within the body, 3 at play, but the predominant one in this instance is going to be phosphocreatine, and that's why it's very, very useful for high intensity, high work rate, very short period activity, sprints, maximum lifts, power output activity, stuff like that, okay? And as the time for activity gets longer, the contribution from PCR gets less and less and less. It does contribute, but it contributes less and less and less. So that is a little bit about how creatine is used, how it is created. We're going to go into a little bit now about why you may supplement with creatine. Why do people supplement with creatine, right? And I've broken this down. We're going to be looking at it from two similar but different perspectives. We're going to be breaking it down into 2 populations. I won't be looking at child data in this episode. We'll be looking at data from adults, and then data in the elderly population is what we're going to be looking at for this part, about why, you know, some of the good things that creatine has been shown to do, just to illustrate this point. So, as I said, creatine has been is a long-study supplement that has a very rigorous research history, has been shown to elicit certain benefits. There is evidence that creatine supplementation can be useful not only, as I said, in younger populations, but in elderly populations. And we're going to be going through a meta-analysis and seeing what that meta-analysis suggests in a moment. Basically, to quote the ISSN, which is known as the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and this is from their 2017 position statement, Creatine monohydrate is the most effective ergogenic nutritional supplement currently available to athletes with the intent of increasing high-intensity exercise capacity and lean body mass throughout training, or through training rather. So let that be your overall summation of the current view on creatine, or let that be the view of creatine currently summed up by the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and allow us to go into the effects that have been observed on elderly populations. So within the meta-analysis that I'll try and cite below, it is with these guys, with this article that I wrote, is about 40, I think 35 to 40 citations that I put in all. So I might not be able to cite them all in the show notes, but I'll cite as many as I can, the most relevant ones. Within this meta-analysis, they showed that elderly individuals, average mean age of about 65 years, supplemented with creatine showed greater increases in knee extensor one rep maximum scores, so that's knee extensor strength, and various other measures of strength as well. Isometric strength, so they improve their strength without moving. So you think about doing a wall sit or a plank or something like that, that's isometric. It's muscle contraction without movement. The strength for that improves, so that indicates an increase in stability, for example, and stuff like that. Chest press 1 repetition maximum, so that improved. Upper body strength improved, and all stuff like that. There's many positives that were highlighted for elderly populations with regards to this creatine supplementation. So we're going to be looking at a couple of effect sizes now. For those who are uninitiated with what an effect size means, this is basically a way of quantifying the difference that we're seeing in terms of whether it would be a small effect, a moderate effect, or a large effect. A large effect would be something like, for example, if we had a large effect size between a person before and after they completed a training program, if we analyze markers like the amount of muscle mass that they gained, their body mass from start to finish, or stuff like that, and we had a strong effect size for skeletal muscle mass, for example, it would be something that you would see on a visual analysis, so to speak. You looking at them either just after they finish the training program, and you see in the physical changes from where they were before, you're seeing two photos side by side, and you can see that that person has made significant progress. That would be indicative of a strong effect size. Okay, moderate effect size and small effect size, just slightly less. You know, there might be less differences that you notice or something like that. Anyway, when we're looking at total body mass, we had a positive effect on total body mass, and it was of a moderate magnitude. When we're looking at fat-free mass, so it's be indicative of muscle mass and body water, maybe bone density, stuff like that, anything that isn't fat mass, we had a strong magnitude of increase, which is very, very good to see. Many reasons why we would like to see this, especially in elderly populations, as we'll be getting onto in a minute. Leg press 1 rep max, we had a significant but small increase. We had a moderate increase in chest press 1 RM, and in the 30-second chair stand test, which is a measure by, for example, how we would measure muscular endurance and functional capacity in older adults, they had a very, very strong magnitude of change, very, very large magnitude of change, which was good to see. Within the meta-analysis, they didn't see any statistically significant improvements in knee extensor and elbow flexor. However, the evidence for improvements in these elements does exist when creatine supplementation is combined with a progressive resistance training program in older adults, and there's a reference there which I got in the paper to support that as well. So although they weren't shown in this meta-analysis, there is other data that exists to show that. When I previously cited the AISSM position stand, it also highlights many benefits of creatine with elderly people supplementing their diet with creatine during resistance training, experiencing greater increases in muscle mass, strength, and functional capacity. That's exactly what we just went through right now, right? Than compared with training alone. This is the overall population size, or the overall sample size for this, was just over 760 participants. So it's quite a large sample size as well. So fairly strong evidence we're looking at here. And as I said, this suggests that creatine supplementation could be very, very useful for elderly populations for increasing their lean muscle mass, or helping to increase their lean muscle mass rather, alongside training, which can help them with regards to simply their independence. Think about it, when people are getting older and they start to lose bits of their independence, it starts to affect their health-related quality of life, and the little things that they can still do to remain independent can have a massive effect. Also, it can help combat the age-related muscle wasting that we're probably all going to experience, which is a condition known as sarcopenia, which is where as you get older, increasingly more of your muscle mass wastes away. And this decreases functional capacity, this decreases their strength, this decreases their independence, and also increases their likelihood of having a fall, and also is likely to increase the severity of it. Think about it, there's less tissue surrounding things like bones. If you think about it, muscle surrounds bones, right? Skeletal muscle that surrounds a skeleton, it surrounds a bone. That provides a protective layer against damage. You have fat on your body, which also provides a protective layer. You have skin, which is a protective layer. In a way, body hair is a protective layer because it protects against cold. So when you lose a protective layer, you're then more susceptible to damage. And that's why elderly population or elderly people, as they get more and more, I don't like to use the word, but they get more and more frail, then they end up, and I'm just going to move the camera a little bit because I realize it's slightly off where I'd like it to be. I move the camera a little bit. There we go. I think that's a little bit better. There we go. That's a little bit better. I kind of lost my train of thought for a little bit. But like I said, when they're losing their independence, and as I said, they have a fall, and the severity of the fall is going to be greater than it would be otherwise. For example, I fall over, I'm probably going to be fine. An elderly person of, say, 70 years old falls over, that could very well be the end of their life in a way. Not necessarily that the fall is going to kill them outright. It might do. But they end up with like a fractured hip, or they end up fracturing their femur or any other bone, and they lose that little bit of independence they have. I mean, it's a massive thing to be able to combat sarcopenia and be able to not only reduce the incidence of falls, but able to reduce the severity as well. And if creatine helps with the adaptations that we get from resistance training, which does help increase and maintain good bone density and increase muscle mass, then it's absolutely a good thing, potentially for a lot of elderly people to include as well. So yeah, it's exhibited a lot of positive effects in elderly populations, and this is extended over, obviously, as you can imagine, into just general adults as well. So creatine supplementation has also been shown to be effective in improving muscular strength and endurance in younger populations. This, for example, this study which I've got referenced here, and I'm going to go a little bit about what we mean by when we say what different studies are. So this was a randomized controlled trial, but not only that, there's a lot of factors which I want to go into and explain a little bit about so you can learn a little bit more about the research process as we go. So randomized just means that participants were randomly assigned to their groups, not selected based on any preconceived criteria or not based on researcher bias. And this is so we can assume the groups to be similar. If something is random, we can at least assume that the groups are going to be similar. There's no outside influence. There's no outside influence, for example, on the part of the researchers that are going to make those groups not similar or drastically different in some way, which is going to decrease result validity and reliability. Then, once they were assigned randomly to their groups, as I said, they were not chosen based on whatever. Their criteria, or this study in particular, was double blind. This means that you can have single blind and double blind studies, right? So blinding just means that, for example, participants are blinded to what treatment they are receiving. Now, this is only able to be done in certain criteria. I talked about this, for example, in my cold water immersion episode, where it's impossible to blind participants to what treatment they're receiving because of the nature of the treatment. It's impossible to submerge somebody in cold water and not have them know what's going on. But you can do a blinding of participants, not physically, obviously, but not let them know what treatment they're getting. And again, they don't know if they're in the treatment group or the experimentation group. And this allows us to control for something called the placebo effect. And the placebo effect is a very, very important thing to control for because it can drastically influence the results of a study. And the placebo effect is basically just the power of belief. And it states that if you believe something will work or won't work, odds are it will or won't, respectively. So, for example, a great example of this is artificial sweeteners, we'll say. A lot of people believe that it's harmful to them, and if they have strong enough belief in that, odds are it may be a little bit harmful to them if it was to be measured. Whereas somebody else takes it, and somebody else drinks Diet Cokes on out the wazoo, and they don't experience the negative changes that we may observe. Another one, for example, exists in diets. People believe that different diets are going to be effective, and as a result, they probably will be more effective. I'm trying to think of as many examples as I can, but basically, it's the power of belief. Okay, and belief is very, very real. Medicine is another very, very important thing. When we're trialing different medicines to see whether they're actually going to be effective, the placebo effect is very, very important to consider. So if you believe something will make you better, then odds are it will. And if you don't believe that something will make you better, odds are it won't. Or at least that's the crux of the placebo effect anyway. Obviously, there is a physiological component with regards to whatever you are testing, but you need to account for the placebo effect if you want to really see that what you are observing is down to the treatment and not down to anything else. It is a very, very important part of research to control for the placebo effect as much as you can. You can't always do it though. Going back to blinding all means is that these participants were not told what treatment group they were in. They were not told whether they were the placebo group, the control group, or the experimentation group. And that's very, very important because, again, you negate any preconceived beliefs. They took it one step further, though. Double blind means that the researchers themselves were also blinded to what participants had which condition. So they didn't know what the groups were. That's another way of reducing researcher bias, which is another very, very important consideration as well. Basically, what happened was a third party came in, and that's how the groups were allocated. Obviously, the participants didn't know whether they were receiving the intervention or the control, and then the researchers didn't know which was the control group or the trial group. So that negates another element of bias as well. So that's really important to mention. And this all adds to the strength of the evidence. Everything in a study adds or detracts from the strength of the study. Okay? Placebo controlled, like I said, it was placebo controlled, hence the blinding. And then finally, it was repeated measures. Okay? Repeated measures simply means that the participants in the groups swapped conditions later on in order to serve as their own controls. Okay, that's all that means. Repeated measures simply means that both sets of participants did the experimental condition and the control condition. So that's another way of again just ensuring the validity and reliability of the results, basically. And you can increase the sample size for both the treatment group and the control group. So and obviously there would have been a washout period in between. There's a washout period to negate any residual effects from the first treatment group. We actually used a repeated measures design as my dissertation in university. It was a randomized repeated measures control trial. So now that we got that out of the way, creatine supplementation, the results. Creatine supplementation relative to the placebo trial showed increases in skeletal muscle thickness. On the whole of individual muscles, they were only small magnitude increases, but then, that added up to a moderate effect size when it came to looking at whole body skeletal muscle thickness. So you might not notice individual differences if you're just looking at one muscle, but then if you look at a person from before to after, you might notice slight changes. That's sort of what that means. I'm sort of trying to quantify that and how that would look in practical setting. And a little bit about how results become statistically significant here as well. So what? Oh, I kicked the camera. Oh no. Okay. So a result becomes statistically significant when we have a p-value or an alpha when we run our numbers of less than 0.05. That means that essentially that there is a less than 5% chance that what we are observing is down to random chance or confounding of any other kind. Okay, it's essentially a way of saying there's less than a 5% chance of what we are viewing is down to the treatment. It's not down to the treatment, sorry. And as a result, that gives us our first bit of strong evidence that the phenomenon that we are investigating was true, or rather the inverse of it was not true. We can reject something called the null hypothesis. Okay, so that is very, very important to consider. If something is not statistically significant, typically we don't even look at it because we haven't hit the threshold to where we can say that this is actually down to something that we were investigating. It's actually because we were investigating it and the treatment that we put on. It might be something else, okay? Or there was just not a strong effect. There was not a strong enough effect. It didn't hit the statistical significance, okay? The leg press strength and chest press strength both improved to a moderate effect size as well. However, interestingly enough, and this is where we start to look at a little bit of nuance as well, is that the chest press strength only improved in males, statistically speaking. The statistical significance was unreached in females. So again, we might look at different methodological conditions, or it might be, to do with some people responding. Maybe males responded greater to creatine than females do, and females might get the similar benefits from creatine, just not to a greater extent as the males. We don't know. We don't know. But it's interesting that this was observed. The mean 1 rep max for the chest press in the creatine group was higher by several kilos, but it's interesting to see that it didn't reach statistical significance. So, the difference was, as I said, a few kilograms. So it's interesting. It's interesting, right? But not great enough magnitude to say these are very high. However, the variance around these results was very high. So maybe it's again to do with that inter-individual response, right? Maybe. Then we have, I just wanted to highlight the magnitude of the change in males was very, very significant for the chest press 1 rep max. So the 1 rep max values rose from 166.53, so these were very strong males, fair play, to 187.59, and the placebo group experienced really no change. But it's interesting to know that their mean values at the start were higher as well. So again, that's interesting to see. Total body strength, we're looking at a small effect size for a small effect size for improvement, and that's just the combined leg and chest press strength. However, there were very, very strong improvements in endurance with the creatine supplementation. So again, like I said, creatine can help out not just with high intensity activities as well, it can help out with endurance activities. And then total body endurance was better as well. However, important to note, the chest press endurance was not different between groups. So again, whether that's to do with the actual training plan itself, or whether they actually did more volume, I'm not 100% sure. But in terms of how it adds to the data, it adds to many other data points that show that creatine is a potent ergogenic aid, with improvements in strength and endurance being significant determinants for success in many individual and team sports. And obviously, it's where you're doing more work that's going to help you in your muscle hypertrophy endeavors, for example, or getting stronger, And it can also aid in other training goals, such as that of muscle hypertrophy, as I just mentioned. As with greater weight lifted comes greater force production. With greater force production comes greater mechanical tension, and which is one of the let me try this again, right? It can also aid in other training goals, such as that muscle hypertrophy. As with greater weight lifted comes greater force production, and with greater force production comes greater mechanical tension. One of, and possibly the important mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy adaptations. So there's many different mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy: mechanical strength, mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. Typically, the big three in terms of the mechanisms, but that's a story for another time. So there's good few reasons there as to why we would supplement with creatine, right? There's a lot of positive benefits with regards to creatine. Now we're going to ask the question of, is it safe? And yes, it is. Creatine is very safe. Creatine is very, very safe. It's one of the safest supplements you can take. To quote the ISSN, unsubstantiated anecdotal claims from the popular media, as well as rare case reports described in literature without rigorous systematic causality assessments, have been refuted in numerous well-controlled clinical studies showing that creatine supplementation does not increase the incidence of musculoskeletal injuries, dehydration, muscle cramping, or gastrointestinal upset. Nor has the literature provided any support that creatine promotes renal dysfunction or has long-term detrimental effects. So just let that sink in for a minute. Mainly because I needed a burp. Pardon me. Evidence, and this is where we're going to go into what we but we're going to look at why some people may say that creatine is unsafe, what they may have heard. So, evidence that creatine renal dysfunction, or is associated with creatine renal dysfunction, comes from a single case report from Pritchard and Cholera, are the two authors on this paper, came out in 1998, And at the time I was viewing this was only an abstract, and for whatever reason, it wasn't financially feasible. I did not buy the edition of the full paper, but going on this, it was a single individual of 25 years with something called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. Okay? This is a rare defect of the kidney where the glomeruli, which is the areas of the kidney where blood is filtered, become scarred and dysfunctional. And they also suffered from nephrotic relapses as well. And it was most likely resulting from pre-existing nephrotic syndrome. So you had to take into account this person already had pre-existing renal conditions. Okay, that's one thing you have to take into account. There's more. Assertions that creatine supplementation is potentially unsafe also comes from a case report involving a 22-year-old male who suffered nephrosis syndrome and I'm going to try, this might take me a few attempts, membranoproliferative glomerulophren... I was so close. Membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis. There we go. MPGN. This happens when the immune system is failing to respond normally and the antibodies sent to attack the harmful antigens instead form complexes and get stuck in the kidneys. Okay? That's what this condition is. However, and I read a little bit into this article, they also mention that the individual was not just taking creatine, they were also taking methandinone, also known as Dianabol, okay, which is an anabolic steroid. And that's obviously going to carry implications with regards to health of its own. However, they were also taking 200 grams of creatine per day. 200 grams of creatine every day. I'm going to say it again as I kick the camera again. So now we're going to touch on something called a dose response. And the thing with a dose response, when it comes out in physiology, more is not always better. Okay? And often more can be very, very damaging. So the dose of something is going to give a certain amount of response, right? A certain amount of training, which is the dose, brings a certain amount of positive adaptation with regards to muscle hypertrophy and strength response, okay? A certain amount of paracetamol, okay, dose, brings about a relief to your headache response, okay? A certain amount of food, dose, brings about a certain amount of body fat gain response. There you go. Dose-response relationships exist everywhere, okay? And the thing about dose response, let's go back to that paracetamol example because it's a very, very stark one. You take a certain amount of it and you get a strong reliever of your headache. Relatively strong, anyway. However, you keep taking it far beyond what the efficacious, or safe dose is, and you end up with a painkiller that kills you. It's that simple. And different compounds, different substances have different, toxicities and doses that essentially enable the same response. For example, you take a certain amount of arsenic. There's a reason why people who may want to, murder somebody by poisoning their food would use arsenic, because you don't need a lot to poison the person. Okay? Arsenic is a very potent poison. So, it only takes a certain amount of arsenic, the dose, to have the lethal response of killing you. And you take too much paracetamol, it does the exact same thing. The thing is that 200 grams of creatine is 40 times what would be considered recommended in terms of daily intake. So you instantly have this idea where maybe it wasn't the compound that was unsafe, maybe it was the dosage, if anything. It's far beyond the point of where you get any diminishing returns in terms of performance and in terms of muscle gain. You can clearly tell that this is a person that was absolutely obsessed with gaining muscle, okay? However, anything potentially that comes in too large amounts has the potential to be harmful. You can die by eating too many friggin' vegetables, for God's sake. There was a classic case of a teacher, I think it was. I can't remember if he was a teacher or a professor at university level. And I think it was somewhere in America, died of vitamin A toxicity because he was drinking, I think it was either 1 gallon or 4 gallons. I can't remember. I think they said a gallon of carrot juice a day, and had a carrot of, like, vitamin A, carotene obsessed diet. Bro, they turned yellow when they died, or they're starting to turn orange when they died. As far as I can tell, as far from what I've heard, too much of anything. Vitamin A is great. It's a necessary vitamin, but too much of it, too much of anything, it will kill you. Okay? And it's sad to say that too much food for most people is killing the nation at the minute. It's that simple. Okay? So anyway, there's the potential that dianabol is very, very harmful, and that's one of the things why anabolic steroids are banned in competition, is due to the safety of them, for example. So obviously not necessarily in bodybuilding competitions, but when you're looking at the World Anti-Doping Association or the World Anti-Doping Agency, they have their list of prohibited substances partially because they've been deemed unsafe in terms of health to the athlete and other people involved in the sport. So as I said, the dosage wasn't stated. The dosage wasn't stated in terms of the dianabol, but you can infer from the creatine. If they were taking 200 grams of creatine a day, God knows what they were doing with the dianabol potentially. Again, I don't want to seem like I'm slandering anybody or whatever. This person ended up with these serious health conditions, and could have been grave consequences at 22 years of age. So this is, it's very, very pervasive. And you hear this and you think, oh my God, this creatine is awful. This creatine is completely unsafe. It's killing us. It's not. It's really, really not. Creatine is one of the safest supplements that you can take that works. So now we're going to go on to some common misconceptions. And the three that I'm going to go over, three that I've been most commonly asked in my time as a trainer is creatine a steroid? Does creatine cause water retention? And does creatine cause hair loss? Okay, so going into is creatine a steroid? And the short answer is no. As previously stated, creatine is a compound derived from various amino acids involved in the urea cycle. Anabolic androgenic steroids differ in that they are synthetic testosterone-based derivatives, okay, making them a Schedule 3 controlled substance, is what they're known as. They are often widely abused for their extremely potent performance-enhancing effects, with a popular effect being greater accruing of lean muscle mass. This makes them a potentially very attractive proposition for athletes and recreational gym goers looking to increase muscle mass due to their worsening body dysmorphia, and for their clout on social media, for social media attention. You'd be surprised how pervasive that is. But this isn't necessarily without consequence. As I said, we're going to go into the World Anti-Doping Code a little bit now. And the two main criteria which render substances illegal in professional sport, for example, are the magnitude of advantages gained. So that's where you have the question of what constitutes an unfair advantage, and the safety of the substance being taken. So the World Anti-Doping Agency state health, as well as ethics, fair play, and honesty. So that's one big criteria. You have health as one, and ethics, fair play, and honesty as another, as their top two criteria. Okay? That's in their code. And they say these substances not only have the great performance-enhancing potential, but also potentially pose a great risk to the athletes or athletes. The steroids in particular have been associated with many potential negative side effects, particularly regarding endogenous, which means naturally occurring within the body, testosterone production. Endogenous testosterone production, the testosterone you naturally produce. They also potentially have a lot of negative effects on lipid metabolism, lipid profiles, and cardiovascular health. The long-term data, any long-term data on steroids is quite difficult to come by because of the perceived and you can make an argument for this unethical nature of which by these experiments would need to be conducted, or these studies rather would need to be conducted, because if you did want to look at the long-term effects of steroids, it would be difficult to get it through an ethics committee that you want to put people on certain doses of hormones for long periods of time and potentially expose them to these completely, very vast negative side effects. Good luck getting that through an ethics committee. Okay, so that's why long-term randomized control trials, you probably never see them in this area. You might see epidemiological data later on down the line, and you might see sort of the odd case report here and there, but you doubt you'll see randomized control trials on the safety of anabolic steroids for a while, unless there's some out there that I haven't been made aware of, which is entirely plausible. But and I'm only going to summarize this next paper because the National Athletic Trainers Association in 2012 issued a position statement outlining some of the potential negative effects of anabolic androgenic steroids. They labeled them via the cardiovascular effects on the central nervous system, hematologic, hepatic, the immune system, the integumentary system, which is your skin, neuroendocrine, musculoskeletal, nephritic, which is your kidneys, and oral, so stuff around your mouth and stuff like that. There's many, many effects. You can read all that going down below. And some of it has very, very strong and consistent evidence to support it. For example, some of the hepatic conditions, or some of the things they labeled in the hepatic section, was something called cholestatic hepatitis, cholestatic jaundice, which is about the flow of bile. You also have peleosis hepatis, adenomas, and carcinomas. So let's go through a little bit about what that means. Cholestasis, for example, which is impaired bile secretion and flow. You have peleosis hepatis, liver blood vessel proliferation resulting in engorgement of capillaries and cavities within the liver. And then you also have carcinomas, which is the beginning of cancer, basically. So there's quite strong evidence to support that. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because one of the main areas where these things are metabolized and broken down and having to be essentially filtered and absorbed is in the liver. It's one of the first places they go to, and the kidneys as well. There's also category B, meaning the recommendation about it is based on inconsistent or limited quality patient-oriented evidence. So there's stronger evidence for some things than for others. However, you can start to make general remarks on the safety of something from stuff like this. However, going back to that original question, and you can answer it just simply with the opening statement that I came up with. Is creatine a steroid? No. Creatine is derived from amino acids in the urea cycle. Steroids are synthetic testosterone derivatives. There you go. Creatine is not a steroid. And it has none so far of the negative effects that have been associated with steroid use attached to it. Does creatine cause water retention? No, not in the traditional sense. Short-term responses to creatine at the minute do result in increases in body water. Okay, the data currently shows that creatine intakes well above people's most regular daily intakes through dietary means, and they were talking about 10 to 20 times as much, have resulted in total body water increases as high as 2%. Okay, 2%. So, and you got to account that's 10 to 20 times. Don't I hear my doggo? 10 to 20 times what most people are going to get. Okay, so take that into account. However, there were no changes in extracellular fluid volume. All of the changes in body water were observed were within the intracellular matrix. And that would make sense given what I said at the start about creatine, which is that it is an osmolyte and it brings water from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid matrix. So, and this is the thing, intracellular fluid is not, or intracellular fluid retention is not what most people think it is. Taking this doesn't mean that you're going to look puffy, okay, or you're going to look bloated, or you're going to have this and you're going to have that, and all of the other nebulous short-term effects that you may have simply from drinking water, okay? When we say that creatine, as I said, pulls water into the cells, that not only aids in cellular hydration, but it's also going to make those cells look a little bit bigger. And as a result, if it's pulling water into muscle, it's going to increase the apparent size of the muscle a little bit, simply because there's more fluid volume in there that are pushing out on the fibers and literally making them look a little bit bigger. It's not increasing their size necessarily, but it's making them appear a little bit bigger. Okay. when you talk about water retention and stuff like that, and people talking that they look bloated and stuff like that as soon as they take creatine, it's not going to be down to the creatine, okay? It's predominantly stored within muscle tissue. You don't store creatine in your stomach and around your intestines. You don't store it there. So it's not causing water retention there, okay? So knowing that, you can take the lean creatine nonsense that you see some fitness influencers peddling and have peddled for years, and you can throw it in the bin and save your money, and instead go to someone like Home Bargains or maybe Tesco or Asda or wherever you get your supplements from, on Amazon, wherever, it doesn't really matter. And instead, pardon me, save your money and spend your money instead on just the normal creatine monohydrate that is going to saturate your muscles to 100% of creatine. And that's when you're going to get the benefits of creatine, by the way, when your muscles are fully saturated with it. It's going to do that 100%. It's not going to have any of these bloating effects. And so anybody that tries to sell you on lean creatine or creatine that doesn't cause water retention, stuff like that, just, you might as well stop listening to them. They're being paid to say that, okay? They're being paid to tell you that, simply because they probably get a kickback of whatever they're selling, or they're getting a certain amount of money from the company that's selling this product that's trying to get you to buy it, okay? And that's the way marketing works. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. You know, you can argue it's unethical, but you know, whatever people got to do to get by, and if the people can sleep at night, well, the people can sleep at night. Anyway, as I said, you can kick the lean creatine stuff to the curb and just go and spend maybe £7 on your creatine for a decent sized tub. It's very, very cheap. It's quite a cheap supplement, all things considered. So, does creatine cause water retention? Yes, but no, not in the traditional sense. And then, does creatine exacerbate hair loss or cause or exacerbate androgenic alopecia, which is another thing called hair loss? Androgenic alopecia being hair loss due to concerns with androgens. So this is not really. It's a widely believed assertion, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence to support it. The one study that is often cited when they say that creatine causes hair loss comes from the authors Van der Merwe and colleagues in a study in 2009. And they stated that after supplemented with creatine in male rugby players, so they did a loading phase across 7 days where they took 25 grams of creatine a day, along with 25 grams of glucose. And the reason for that is that glucose intake stimulates insulin secretion, and insulin secretion stimulates the uptake of nutrients from the bloodstream into cells. From into cells. Sorry, yeah, that's exactly right. I said it right. What am I trying to correct myself for? And that increased uptake of nutrients also comes with the increased uptake of creatine. There is evidence to show that intaking creatine alongside carbohydrate has been shown to enhance creatine uptake. So that's why they've done that. The placebo then was 50 grams of simply glucose a day, and they've done that to equate the overall amount. So if you have 25 grams of creatine, you have 25 grams of glucose, that's 50 grams overall, you get a 50 gram placebo. And then afterwards, after that loading phase of 7 days, they done a maintenance phase where it was 5 grams of creatine a day for plus 25 grams of glucose, and then the placebo bolus was 30 grams of glucose per day. And that was for 14 days. So this was 21 days overall. This increased a marker which has been associated with, paradoxically associated with hair loss, called dihydrotestosterone. They increased it significantly, 56% over the course of the maintenance, over the course of the loading, and then by 40% over the course of the maintenance. And this has been the subject of study regarding androgenic alopecia or hair loss, as DHT is significantly elevated in androgenic alopecia. But the question remains of if it is causal to it. On one side, and this is where this, in my opinion, is a very, very nuanced argument. I'm personally leaning more towards the fact, or more towards the idea that creatine does not cause hair loss, but let's go through it. The idea, on the face of it, that DHT would increase hair loss causally, so it would miniaturize the hair follicles, and this may be inherently paradoxical, because if you think about it, one of the factors which I glossed over in the NATA position statement on the safety of steroids is the effects that it has in women. And one of the things that happen is when you give testosterone derivatives or testosterone to women, they end up getting more male-like features, one of which is male pattern baldness, changes to the appearance of their sexual organs and stuff like that. But if then we were to give, females that testosterone and they end up with more hair growth, which is another one of the factors associated with that masculinization that females undergo when they take certain levels of male hormones, that when we give these, when these rugby players have a higher level of more potent testosterone, that they experience hair loss, or that people would experience hair loss with a higher level of a more potent form of testosterone. It's inherently paradoxical. We would expect to see multiplication, not miniaturization. And that was pointed out by another researcher called Oostner in 2013. However, a relatively recent review suggested that androgens such as DHT do indeed play a role in androgenic alopecia due to actions on genetically susceptible hair follicles in areas termed androgen dependent, with the hypotheses being that androgens are the most important regulators, so being able to stimulate or inhibit hair growth depending on their body site location. Okay? This basically is a roundabout way of saying the exact mechanisms of hair loss are yet to be understood. However, the predominant reason seems to be, or the predominant determinant seems to be genetic disposition. It seems to be relatively unaffected by creatine because, as we're going to be getting onto now, the results have never been replicated. I'm sorry, I don't know what that long pause is, but I'll probably edit that out. The results have never been replicated, and as pointed out in a review by Antonio and colleagues from 2021, high-intensity resistance exercise itself can significantly increase androgenic hormones. So you have to take that into account as well. It's not just creatine that's at play here. As we know, they were undergoing a resistance training program as well. They also point out that in this specific study, there were no increases in total testosterone levels and that free testosterone was not measured, So free testosterone, all that is that you have a certain amount of testosterone within your body, and that is your total testosterone, not free. Now, a certain amount of that total is bound up in something called sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG, and as a result, it is completely useless to us in terms of muscle growth and stuff like that. So all of that is bound up in this sex hormone binding globulin. It's, it could, for all muscle growth purposes and stuff like that, it can essentially be ignored. SHBG is a completely different thing. But then your free test is the stuff that you have then to build muscle and do all these things that we associate with testosterone, right? And they also pointed out that the DHT to T ratio, the dihydrotestosterone to testosterone ratio, remained within clinical limits. And at baseline, which is the start of the study data collection process, DHT values in the creatine group were 23% lower than the placebo group, which I thought was quite interesting when I went and read this. And I sort of hypothesized myself that the small increase with an observed drop in the placebo group's DHT response, which is what I got, I think, from reading the graphs, would explain the increase in DHT, which with creatine statistically significant. So there we go. That was what I hypothesized. That was the sort of conclusion that I was sort of leaning towards. It might have just been a weird coincidence with regards to some of the results. However, one may hypothesize that creatine supplementation may have resulted in the athletes being able to train more intensely over this training period. And as a result, and this would have been due to those PCR stores that can donate those phosphates for ATP resynthesis, they can train harder, and then we'd see these greater increases in DHT with creatine rather than in the placebo group. However, so far, many studies exist investigating the effects of creatine supplementation on androgens such as testosterone, with some reporting small statistically significant but rather physiological insignificant differences, or increases rather. Statistically significant in the fact that when we run the numbers, there's a statistically significant difference between the two groups. However, when we look at it on a physiological level, we question about whether the result is actually relevant and, it's very informative, but whether it is something we would have to actually have a large magnitude. And that's what I mean. It doesn't necessarily have a physiologically relevant magnitude. And that was during acute times of creatine loading only, up to a week. There's been observed trends, which mean it's on the border of statistical significance, of higher testosterone with creatine compared to placebo conditions. There've been trends. So is it possible, or is it just down to resistance training? However, others have reported no significant changes in hormone levels through creatine supplementation for free testosterone. So there you go. There's evidence, there's compelling evidence that suggests that, creatine doesn't necessarily impact testosterone levels, especially the free test that is what we're going to be using to build muscle. Right? Then creatine is going to be exerting these positive effects from allowing you to train harder, and then that training harder is going to influence your level of hormones that then you observe. That's what's more likely happening here. But given this, and that free testosterone is what would undergo conversion to DHT, it is very unlikely that creatine would cause increased DHT conversion and thus contribute to, as I said, androgenic alopecia. So does creatine cause hair loss? Probably not. Probably not. So now we're going into how much do I need? And this goes down to the way creatine works in terms of when you get the benefits from it. You only get the benefits from creatine when your muscle is fully saturated with creatine, okay? So basically, it's a bit like your muscle gets full with creatine. The phosphocreatine stores get full, and as a result, you just take your maintenance dose then. That's the idea behind a loading versus maintenance phase. The loading phase is designed to get you to full muscular saturation as quick as possible, and then the maintenance phase is just designed to get you to maintain that, okay? So with a loading phase of creatine, 20 grams per day, which is what a typical loading phase is, you can expect to be fully saturated with creatine in about 7 days. However, this is sometimes where you see a lot of people complaining about GI distress. Although creatine doesn't directly cause GI distress, or rather when you're taking a lot of creatine, it does have to go through the small intestine and to get absorbed. So yeah, it might, and obviously it's going to be pulling water into those cells slightly as well. So it's unclear, again, how much GI distress you're gonna experience, or if you're gonna experience any at all. However, if you do, you don't have to do a loading phase. This is the thing. Is it good to do a loading phase? Well, yeah, you get saturated with creatine quicker, absolutely. But if it does actually cause you to experience quite a bit of GI distress, maybe it's not worth it, and maybe you just stick to a lower dose and it just takes a little bit longer to get you to full saturation. You're gonna get there anyway. So with the maintenance, with the just going straight for a maintenance dose and gradually building up, you can expect to be fully saturated within about 4 weeks, okay? And that's about a 5 gram dose per day. So when we're looking at loading versus not loading, a loading phase would typically look, as a rule of thumb, like 0.3 grams per kilogram of body mass 3 to 4 times a day for 7 days. That's what typically works out as 20 grams for most people, 20 grams a day for most people, okay? So you'd have several servings of creatine throughout the day for 7 days, and then you'd maintain simply off 3 to 5 grams a day for the rest of the period. For larger athletes, maybe 5 to 10 grams a day, okay? As I said, if you just go for the 5 grams a day, might take you a little bit longer, but you're still going to get it. There's no need to cycle creatine, okay? You don't need to cycle creatine, as we said. You're not going to get benefits from coming off it and going back on it. It's not something which you need to cycle out of necessity to try and keep you healthy for the long term, okay? Like steroids, for example, it's not good to be on steroids chronically long term. Creatine is very, very different. You don't need to cycle creatine. So, and that's it. In summary, creatine is a potent, and this might be the thing where this would be the one thing which you want to take away from it. Creatine is a potent ergogenic aid with application to many sports and types of training. Supplementing with it only boosts the amount we naturally get from diet, and creatine supplementation has been shown to elicit many powerful effects. It is relatively cheap, very safe, not a steroid, doesn't cause water retention, bloating, and doesn't contribute, or likely doesn't contribute, to your receding hairline. Loading can get your muscle saturated quicker, but once fully saturated, you're ready to reap the rewards of enhanced phosphocreatine stores, contributing to greater force production and work capacity, which can help with goals of getting stronger and more muscular, as well as it's been shown to have beneficial effects on muscular endurance. For older populations, this may also be a good supplement to use to combat the age-related muscle wasting that comes with age and sarcopenia, and increasing bone density through the enhancement of resistance training. And there we go, leading to greater quality of life. Verdict: creatine monohydrate all the way. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that episode, guys. I hope you found it useful. Obviously, I know I haven't been making eye contact with the camera all the time because I've been reading my notes and whatnot. The way I've got my setup right now, it's difficult for me to have the camera, the light, the microphone, which I just hit, obviously, and my laptop and everything else that I need to do this in a convenient location. And if there's stats which I need to read out, or I want to read something out in a specific way to make sure I get it right. Obviously, I know I'm looking over here the whole time. If you're not watching the video, obviously you don't need to really worry about that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for spending an hour of your time with me. I hope you found it useful. Obviously, if you found it useful, please do share it around and tell your friends about it. And if you have any questions with regards to training, nutrition, anything like that, please get at me at coaching by coaching_by_GC on Instagram or GC on Facebook. Please get in touch and let's talk about your goals together. I hope you have a great day, guys. Hope to catch you soon, and go train hard, and maybe go supplement with creatine if it's something you've decided you want to do. So yeah, have a good one, guys. Can't wait to catch you again soon. Out.